Oh my, Heidi, Mike. I declare the council meeting open, please. In doing so, I ask Councillor White to come here.
Mahi tēnei rā, ka mahi o te kaunihiro toi moana. O hikalai taku tō mātou kai whakau. Amen. Amen.
Councillors, today's meeting is being recorded as opposed to live streaming, just so you're aware. But in terms of the recording of a meeting, I would remind councillors that the public section of this meeting has been recorded. We've made available on both the Regional Council website following the meeting, the archive for a period of 3 years. For those members of the public here today, all care will be taken to maintain your privacy. However, as a visitor in the public gallery, your presence may be recorded, and by remaining in the public gallery, it's understood your consent is given if your image is inadvertently broadcast. Also remind all present local government decision-making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in the court of law and determined to be slanderous. We have no apologies. We have Councillor White, who you can see is zooming in. We have no...
I just zoomed in.
Oh, Councillor Rose, sorry. Councillor Rose, my apologies. There are items not on the agenda. There are no items to be added to the agenda unless councillors have any. If so, speak up, or is it the one we discussed earlier? Councillor? Okay, I'll do it when I get just before the minutes. Order of business. There's no intention to change the order of business. Declarations of conflict of interest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 9.3, 9.4 and 10.3, Quayside.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Brunning.
I have an interest and maybe a conflict in part of the transport, land transport plan.
Thank you, Councillor Brunning. Public excluded visibly transferred into the open. There is none. Councillor Thurston.
Chairman, under item 9.2 coming up, I just wanted to seek your guidance here because David Spears, the Director of Regional Relationships for Waikato on the Bay of Plenty for NZTA, Whakatahi, is available on Zoom, and I think it would be appropriate if we asked him to make any points of clarification or make any appropriate comments with regards to the Regional Land Transport Plan. And also he has indicated that NZTA have been working on a number of solutions with regards to progressing the NTNL Stage 2 project. So with your indulgence, I would ask you to invite him to join the meeting by Zoom for item 9.2.
Thank you, Councillor Thurston. So I have taken your advice on this matter. In regards to this matter, there has clearly been some consternation, some concern about the process that was followed, and I agree with you that the opportunity for Mr. Spears to take or state the position of NZ or Kotahi is appropriate. When we get to that agenda item, I'll ask you to take us through it in terms of outlining and then suggesting or taking Mr. Spears in terms of what the issues clarified that you want clarified and then closing it out. So thank you. Thank you. Minutes. Can we go to the minutes of the 20th of May, Regional Council minutes? Moved Councillor Lees, seconded Councillor Winters. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Any matters arising out of that? If not, can we go through to 8.11, Regional Council minutes, LTP deliberations. And Tonna, these minutes are not appended to the agenda. I'm advised that they have been circulated approximately a month ago. They were in Stella, and councillors in the last day or so have been circulated by email, copies of the hard copy. Everyone happy with that? So, and that's just those ones, or is it's just those ones? So I'll move the adoption of those minutes. Seconded, Councillor Love. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Any matters arising? Clearly not. Thank you. Regional Land Transport Plan Hearing Subcommittee, 8.2. Mr. Thurston.
I'm happy to move, Chairman.
Moved. Seconded, Councillor Nees. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Ringtoki River Forum, minutes 9th of April. Moved. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Thank you, Mr. Eatey. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Tauranga Moana Advisory Group minutes.
Moved.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald.
Second.
Seconded, Councillor Thompson. All those in favour say aye. Against.
Just a query on these minutes, noting that they are, sorry, just a query on these minutes, noting that they are dated the 11th of December, and we've had several full council meetings between now and then. Can you explain why they have taken so long to come to this committee?
Thank you, Tonna.
They don't come on the full council agenda until they've been approved by the group itself, which they now have been.
Thank you for that explanation.
Mr. Chair,
Councillor Nees.
just a question. There was a request made at that meeting that the distribution of mangrove report would be circulated and would come to the to Councillor Winter's committee. It hasn't occurred yet. I just wanted to check that that is active upon, please.
So thank you, though. We've completed our resolution. So the minutes of Tauranga Moana Advisory Group meeting have been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. Regional Land Transport Plan Hearing.
So moved,
The 8th of
Chairman.
May. Thank you, Councillor Thurston. Thank you, Councillor Nees. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. Takes us through the reports. Chairperson's report. It's appended on page 64 of your agenda. I'll move it. Take it as read. Any questions?
Second.
Seconded, Councillor Crosby. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. That takes us through to the adoption of the Regional Land Transport Plan for 2021. And over to the Chief Executive to introduce the staff.
Nā koutou katoa, I thank you, and this is a very large day for the Regional Council with both the Regional Land Transport Plan and the long-term plan for your adoption. We will expect to have Mr. Spears join us shortly. Over to Namuta to present this report.
Tēnā koutou councillors, myself and James Llewellyn are here to take this report as read and answer any questions you may have. I would like to say that the adoption of the Regional Land Transport Plan is a key milestone for you. We've been on the journey of its development since 2019, and you'll recall we started early so that we would have enough time to develop it. The Regional Land Transport Plan has gone through a robust process and is legislatively compliant. You'll recall, some of you may recall that the Regional Transport Committee have adapted its advice in terms of and direction, in terms of government direction. It was consulted on, there were hearings that were held, the Regional Land Transport hearings, deliberations panel subcommittee, then deliberated on those submissions that they heard and made recommendations back to the Regional Transport Committee. On the 9th of June, the Regional Transport Committee endorsed the recommendations of the subcommittee, and those changes can be seen in your separately circulated attached Regional Land Transport Plan. And so we are seeking today the adoption, the direction from you in terms of adopting the Regional Land Transport Plan, and the recommendations are on page 69. And they are essentially that you adopt the Regional Land Transport Plan and that you agree that any final corrections, grammatical or typos before the document submission can be delegated to me to make those changes. And you'll recall the tight timeframes here. This needs to be submitted with wakakotahi by the 30th of June.
Thank you, Namuta. Mr. Thurston is Chair of the Regional Land Transport Committee.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to concur with everything that the staff have reported on this morning. It was a monumental piece of work, and I'd just like to commend everyone who put their shoulders to the wheel on this exercise. right from across every part of the region, particularly the technical advisory group, which were representatives from all the TLAs. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge the work of the hearings panel. And it was good to have Commissioner Selwood there, representing the interests of both Tauranga and the Western Bay of Plenty. So, no, I'm more than happy to move the recommendations 1, 2 and 3, and at some point, of course, before we go off this item or whenever he's available, we'll have David Spears available to make some appropriate comments around the TNL. So, no, thanks to everyone involved. A monumental piece of work, and it was very well received, I understand, in Wellington, and they're looking forward to receiving it in due course.
Thank you, Councillor Thurston. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Neese? Okay,
Yes,
it's been seconded by Councillor Neese, and it's now open for discussion. However, Mr. Spears is with us, so I'll hand over to you to Mr. Thurston. Mr. Spears is the Regional Director of Waka Kotahi. Could you do the introductions and outline the outcome we're looking for?
Chairman,
Beforehand?
Chairman, if you wouldn't mind,
Yes,
a
Councillor
point of
Thompson.
clarity. What abilities does this council have to change anything other than grammatical or typos? I mean, do we have the ability today to add or change matters? I just need some clarity around that.
I would say they are limited, but that is something we could pose to David Spears at NZTA. But David, it's been passed over to me. Can you hear us? It's great to have you with us, and if I can just acknowledge you as an outstanding contributor in your role as Director of Regional Relationships. I think the Chairman just elevated your status, I think, but I think you're the Director of Regional Relationships for the Waikato and Bay of Plenty, and you do an outstanding job, and thank you for your contribution. But as you know, we've moved and seconded this, but it is yet to be put to councillors for them to vote on, but I'm hoping and assuming that it will go through like the proverbial knife through butter, but who's to say? But having said that, as you know, there's considerable interest in this region around the TNL and the postponement, the deferment or the cancellation of it. And in particular, safety issues around Omokoroa and the interchange and in that area, and it's of particular interest and of personal interest to a number of our own councillors here at the table. Who have skin in the game and have a lived experience of the dangers of this highway on a daily basis. But what I'd just like you to comment on is pick up on the concerns that were raised at the Regional Transport Committee as to reinstating the Takatimu North Link and making the Omokoroa interchange a priority project in the RLTP, which was a major concern of his worship in the Western Bay, as we know. But if you could just comment for the benefit of councillors here, and there may be some questions as to what you see as the NZTA way forward. Picking up on Councillor Thompson's comments, is there any ability to tweak anything at this stage, and how can we elevate this critical piece of work back into our agenda? Over to you.
Kia ora. Morena, everybody. Just picking up on that, Councillor Thurston, thank you, and just acknowledging your chairmanship of the process that we went through as well. It felt like a very well-run and robust process. In terms of TNL, it is a regrettable outcome that we have landed where we have with the New Zealand Upgrade Programme, and a situation where TNL Stage 2 is not currently in either Waka Kotahi's program or in the RLTP. And I see James in the room, so James, wave your hand if I say anything that's completely incorrect. But your options at the moment today are either adopt or don't adopt this plan. You don't have the scope to make changes. In terms of TNL, it's theoretically possible to include TNL at this late stage, but I would say completely impractical to do so, because the precursor to be that NZTA would have to bring TNL into its program. It's currently not in its program, and we simply do not have the time nor, I suppose, the detailed plan to do that at this stage. If it's not in our program because we're the lead agency, it then can't be in the regional transport plan. The other issue you would have, even if it were practical to do this, is that the introduction of that piece of work would trigger criteria, because it's far more than $20 million of investment, and you would have to go back out for public consultation based on your own significance policy. So what we propose and are already acting on is that we explore what the alternative measures are at Omokoroa to address the immediate need for a safe interchange at Omokoroa, and also the need for Omokoroa interchange to free up the housing development potential, and that we would look to develop a proposal that could be introduced as a variation to the RLTP as and when that is appropriate. Given that the Omokoroa interchange was part of the whole TNL program, we don't think that we will get, in fact the Minister has indicated that we won't get full funding for that in the 10-year window. The Minister has, however, expressed quite a bit of sympathy for a view that we could bring a proposal forward to address the Omokoroa interchange in the course of the RLTP. So that's what we're working on. I would suggest that that's what I will be bringing back to the Regional Transport Committee for its commentary, for its involvement, and to involve all of the Transport Committee partners in how we develop that program.
Thank you, David. Chairman, would you be able to dispense with standing orders? I know Councillor Bonning has indicated a perceived conflict, but I think he's got skin in the game in this area. It's a particular personal interest to he and his family and the members of the communities out in that area. So if you'd be so good as to afford him an opportunity to make some appropriate comments about where this is all landing at the moment.
Approved, Councillor Thurston.
Well, Mr. Chairman, yes, I do have a conflict, so it's a bit hard to speak, but I want to speak generally as on behalf of my constituents and all the other landowners. I think there may be about 60 who are affected by this, who have been verbally promised that under the program before it was pulled. We were visited each in December when the program was announced that the full TNL was going ahead, and the indications were given to all those landowners that the program was that they would be doing their surveys, geotech, all those works, which they say subsequently got permission from landowners, and a lot of that work has already been done, and I believe it's completed on our property. As part of that meeting in December, we asked for timeframes and were given verbally timeframes of in 12 months' time, NZTA would be instigating the consents required and begin land purchase. So there is an obligation there. There is potentially an opportunity for a class action against the government if they do not
Councillor Brunning, can I just interrupt you there? I think the issue in terms of a contract to whatever stage between the landowners and the Crown is between the landowners and the Crown. And I think, as you stated, your conflict of interest, which we've given you leave to speak to, I would much prefer that you spoke to the substantive issue that David raised, which is essentially issues around the Omokoroa interchange and the safety issues that are emanating from that. So could you give us a view as representing that community out there, the issues that they see as pertinent, what potential solutions are, given you've heard David said that we can potentially seek a variation to the land transport plan?
It's my view that doing work on the Omokoroa intersection is not feasible without doing a much greater work on that. and that's the advice I've had. The disappointing thing is that we have been assured as a community and as a nation, because it's a national road, it's a state highway, that this work would be done. And so for whatever reason, the community has been hoodwinked that this would be part of the Regional Land Transport Program. It's in the current one. It was topped in the current one. The government chose to fund it via another means, and it has not been in this program that we're here to approve today. And that is what I object to strongly, that our communities have been hoodwinked in this process. This process is a bad process. I'll leave it at that. My other concern, though, is a general concern with the plan, in that we're talking about reducing congestion. We're talking about movement of freight. We're talking about a growing community. We're talking about the biggest freight port in New Zealand, and yet we have 10% waiting for resilience, and that does not equate to me. And on those grounds, I will vote against this today.
Thank you, Councillor Running. Councillor Thurston.
I think Councillor Thompson was before me.
Oh, your question wasn't answered before.
I've got a question to David.
Okay. There you go. Thank you.
Through you, Chairman. David, can we just be very clear that what you're talking about is an interchange and not roundabouts?
Apologies, I muted. So at this point, I can't be clear about what the preferred option would be at the site. What I can say is that the design engineers have had as much notice, potentially 3 or 4 days more than the rest of the community about this change. We are looking at what the options would be, with a view that what we don't want to do is build something that doesn't link to long-term future outcomes. So we don't want to build a little roundabout that then we have to walk away from in order to build the whole. So whatever we do will be with a view to making it a future-proofed solution.
Thank you.
Councillor Nees.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge Councillor Thurston, who did an amazing job of chairing the whole process. It was quite a challenging process at times, and I think he did an amazing job, so I just want to recognise that. Secondly, I've been an integral part of the progress of this plan, and I still have some concerns that what we've got in front of us doesn't reflect the discussion that occurred at the RTC with regard to treatment of the TNL. Now, the RTC didn't actually see this final version and sign it off. They had the previous version, they had the submissions, and they gave direction to staff on what they would like to have changed in the plan. So I'm not sure that that direction has been fully built into the plan. So I need to be clear about what we can and can't do here. What I'm going to suggest is something that I think will meet the expectations of the RTC, but we haven't got time for it to go back to the RTC. But we do have a resolution from the RTC giving the chairman the ability to sign off on minor amendments. So before I actually talk to the detail of that, I just want to reflect on the situation on State Highway 2 and why the Mayor of Western Bay is so concerned about the process and the situation we find ourselves where the TNL is not in our plan as a prioritised project. Earlier this week, there was yet another death on State Highway 2. I was talking to a landowner where that occurred, and that's the 10th death in the recent past that has occurred in front of his property. Our own councillor Browning was first on the scene and somebody died. So this is not something that we can ignore, and we really have to do what we can to ensure for the people of our region that this safety black spot is fixed once and for all. So that is the reason why Mayor Weber was really concerned, and why in fact he voted against the adoption of the Regional Land Transport Plan, and why I'm suggesting that we make sure that the right words are in the plan today. So the discussion that was held at the Regional Transport Committee was that they wanted to signal to the government that this was really important to the region, and they asked that it be added in the plan, and a footnote be indicated that it added in the plan as a project we wanted but wasn't funded, and also a footnote in the plan to explain why we felt it was important. What hasn't been included in the plan is it hasn't been added in to the table number 15, activities the RTC requests to be included in the Waka Kotahi investment proposal. It's been tacked on just into the bottom of the prioritised list and said this hasn't been prioritised because funding's been pulled. So what I would like consideration of is that on page 94 of the plan, given Mayor Weber's concerns, next to the comment or the footnote on TNL, we add, given the poor safety record of State Highway 2 in the vicinity and increasing growth pressures, this project is still regarded as a high priority for funding for the region as soon as possible. So that is the intent of the RTC to actually flag why it is important to the region. And then also on page 123, I'm suggesting that the TNL be added with the Katikati bypass as projects that we want to have added into the national program or the Waka Kotahi investment proposal. And I'd like, if possible, some more words as a footnote to that insertion.
The board has been raised.
The point of order is, and I'm in absolute sympathy for what we're trying to achieve here, but we've been told that we either vote for it or we don't accept it. We don't have a choice in between. So can I have some staff clarification on the implications of voting against it, what the implications are, and whether the opinion given is correct that we cannot amend it as it stands, because otherwise it becomes, and so no disrespect to you, Councillor Neves, because I fully support what we're trying to do, and I just want to make sure we've got the process right.
Yes, through you, Chair, that's absolutely correct what Mr. Spears talked about in terms of the decision in front of you. Can I suggest in regards to what Councillor Neves has raised, that the third recommendation is changed to include the chair of the RTC. If there are issues with what RTC had agreed that haven't been reflected in the plan, then that delegated authority to both the RTC chair and General Manager Strategy and Science will lead the way to pick up that. So recommendation 3 would be agree that final corrections limited to grammatical, typographical errors and necessary updates for financial information before document submission can be delegated to the RTC chair and General Manager Strategy and Science. Because I think Councillor Neves has raised the point that what she expected to occur from the RTC meeting hasn't occurred.
Just to follow on from that, just so we're absolutely clear, because of the significance of over 20 million, it becomes a significant item, will that be able to be added under item 3 of the recommendation?
So look, I'm just speaking off the cuff here, Mr. Thurston, but I think the threshold of 20 million is the detail. I mean, there may well be an option that doesn't meet that threshold in terms of cost that may be applicable. But I think the suggested way forward that the Chief Executive's book gives the Chair and Muta the opportunity to capture those issues, if that was the intent of the Regional Land Transport Committee, to be captured in here.
Can I make a comment?
Councillor Thompson.
I believe that the word limited should come out and it be replaced by the word including, so that matters regarding the Regional Transport Committee's desires could be absorbed within that resolution. So I would like to, has anyone moved this motion? They have.
It's been moved.
That's so that I would be proposing an amendment by the word of the deletion of limited to the word including.
As the seconder, I would have to be dependent on the chair of the committee amending the his.
I'm happy with what's proposed.
Then I'm happy to accept those amendments. I would just like to finish what I was saying though, because I suggest some additional words on page 123, which provides an alternative route to take pressure off a stretch of State Highway 2 with high traffic counts and high crash rate and DSI performance. TNL, and particularly the Omokara interchange /intersection is considered by the region to be of high importance to safely accommodate growth at Omokara. I believe those additions will satisfy the concerns of the Regional Transport Committee. We're not actually inserting those projects into the plan. We're actually inserting them into a table which suggests that Waka Kotahi consider including them in their proposal. Staff have already tacked them on the bottom of the prioritised list that said that they're not actually in the prioritised list, but they are there at the desire of the Regional Transport Committee. So I just leave it to you to consider what I've said. I believe it holds space with the community of the Western Bay. It holds space with the sentiments of the Regional Transport Committee. And I believe with the recommended amendments, I believe it is able to be accommodated with due process. Thank you.
Chairman, I'm happy with that. But just two things. The Regional Transport Committee has publicly expressed its anger and frustration at what has occurred with regards to TNL, and that's been well publicised. I fully concur with what Councillor Nees has said, and I see these words as embellishments rather than major changes. With regards straight to my colleague Councillor Brunning, we did ask the staff to go away and bring back a fourth scenario that put much greater emphasis on freight and resilience. The outcome of that was that it was put forward by Commissioner Selwood. I seconded it to get it on the table. It didn't fly, and we reverted back to the original scenario which we had gone out to public consultation on. We also sought a major legal opinion with regards to climate change, but as it became very, very clear to everyone participating in this process, the moment you tweaked one area, it completely impacted on another. Staff may wish to comment, but the assurances that we were given, and Councillor Nees, I know you will support me on this one, was that if and when we get multimodal nailed, for want of an expression, freight will be the major beneficiary of that. So whether that happens in our lifetime, pray God it happens in the next few years. But no, that's just in answer to your query around freight, Councillor Brunning. So, but no, the committee is on record sharing its major levels of anger and frustration around what has been dealt to the people of the Western Bay with the deferment of the TNL.
So could I just endorse the comments made by the last two speakers? And I think we need to split out the issues here. So firstly, the cancellation of TNL by the Minister is a ministerial decision backed by Cabinet, and we have to accept that. However, sentiment around the safety issues here, I think, is the paramount, preeminent issue that concerns that community. On one occasion, I'm sitting in forums where we're encouraging housing intensification in Omakaroa, yet we want to leave the major entry and exit facilities into that community status quo. It does not stack up. And I think that Mr. Spears would agree with that. We just have to convince people in Whakakotahi or in Parliament there needs to be some urgent remediation made there to accommodate and ensure the safety of that community. Mr. Von Daleson, you want to speak?
No, I'm coming in late.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers?
I'll move the motion before.
So the motion's been put.
So you amended.
Oh, with the amendment, yeah, that one word, yeah.
So the amendment is captured in bullet point 3. Everybody clear? Everybody happy? Motion, the resolution's been moved and seconded. I'll put it. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No.
Carried. Thank you. Right, that takes us through to 9.3, which is adoption of fees and charges. Mr. Lecompte. Oh, Mr. Spears, could I thank you for your attendance and your wise counsel? And as I said, it was fortuitous that you were here to hear the discussion and the sentiment that sits behind that particular roading network, especially the Omakaroa interchange. And I ask you to do all that we can collectively to ensure that there's some remediation put in place there as soon as possible. Thanks very much, David.
Heard, understood, and we will act on it.
Thank you.
Ka kite.
Mr. Lecompte.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bringing the changes policy for adoption today, we've been through the full consultation process, incorporated your direction from the deliberations meeting, and been through a full final legal review. And we're proposing the policy is adopted. There is some further work to be done that's outside of the policy in terms of making sure the clarity of communication of the reasons for various charges and the processes that are followed that will follow on our website at a later date.
Movement. Move, Councillor Winters. Seconded, Councillor Love. Any discussion? No further discussion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Keyside Holdings Statement of Intent 9.4, Mr. Taylor. So this came out, councillors, under a separate agenda, and we have Scott Hamilton with us. So you got a PowerPoint presentation, Scott.
Good morning, everybody. It's a very, very quick PowerPoint presentation just to highlight the changes from the draft statement of intent to the final. I'll quickly walk through those for everybody's benefit. We're basically elaborating on the forward of it in terms of telling more of the story. This is the 30th anniversary of Quayside this year. There is one company that we've removed out, which was a company which was dormant anyway, but basically we don't need to pay the audit fees anymore. Sorry, Leon. And in terms of the port, we've just defined the majority as 50.1, which has come through in the long-term plan. The performance targets, we've created a new category, which is regional benefit assets. These have a different performance target to some of our other assets, and that includes the metrics in there for Rangiora and Tauriko as blocks. Governance, we've noted that we're doing an update on the distribution policy, and that will be done by the 31st of December. And that will then align to help with that distribution to council at the bottom there as well. And we've done some merging of the responsible investment and ESG targets, which is kind of putting a bit more depth into that objective there and more aligned to obviously through other significant investment entities nationally. Year 1 and 2 distributions are unchanged. Year 3 on our draft is 38.2, and we'll put it in as a range of 38.2 to 41.2. But obviously noting that that will be subject to that policy that will get drafted. And therefore, year 3 and onwards, those are the changes in terms of the statement of intent. And to quickly talk to the Toi Moana one, jumping on to the next agenda item. Let's go forward, sorry, backwards. Toi Moana, look, it is a base distribution of 5%. That is to reflect the fact that we have amended the SIPO in discussions with the council team here, and that will allow us to take international equities as well. Effectively, we're moving from an income mandate to more of a growth or a total return mandate. The distribution catch-up for year one of the long-term plan is in there and it's obviously subject to being able to make that catch-up, but as it stands at the moment, we've already got half of it in the bank. If the markets stay where they are today, and that is after a distribution for this year. That's as much as I needed to say. I'm happy to take questions, Chairman.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, hi Scott. Mr Chairman, I'm just very conscious that in the public excluded section of this meeting, we will be having a discussion in relation to the statement of intent and the letter of expectation. And I wonder if the recommendations might simply reflect that there may be some matters that come out of that discussion that might impact the statement of intent, so that rather than us adopting it right now, that we just simply note that there may be some matters that arise from the public excluded discussion that may or may not, I don't know, impact the content of the statement of intent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. On the basis of commercial sensitivity, I think it's an appropriate way to move forward. So because we have this agenda item, we probably just need to note it. We will then deal with the questions in terms of statement of intent and confidential, and then come out for formal resolution for adoption confidential. Finished, Scott? Okay. Thank you. So that applies both to Quayside Holdings and the Toy Minor Trust. That takes us through to the adoption of a long-term plan, 9.6, page 125. Right, procedural matter. Could we, Siobhan, just put that on hold and perhaps hear from Leon first in terms of all New Zealand's issues around the adoption of the plan? Welcome, Leon.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Tēnā koutou katoa, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for letting me attend your meeting. This will be a very short speech because we've provided you with the audit report already. Intend on issuing an unqualified opinion, stating basically in short that it's a reasonable basis for long-term decision-making and accountability. The information assumptions underlying the forecast information are reasonable, and then we refer to some disclosures in your plan. We will issue you a short management report sometime in the future. Because of the praises I've spoken to at the Audit and Risk Committee, I'm not going to go into reason for that, except that we are slightly under pressure because we just don't have enough auditors. The good news is that we've managed to complete this audit. And then I also, as I already shared with Matt and Debbie, just want to acknowledge management, but also my own team. I think we did really well. This is an excellent process, and we've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Leon. So essentially, clean burn health on time. Councillors, any questions to Leon?
Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. Appreciate it. Siobhan, you can stay if you like, Leon.
I'll stay for the short bit, I hope.
Okay, thank you.
So we've reached adoption of the long-term plan, which is the culmination of a significant process that started in early 2020 with a revision of strategic direction, went through the consultation process, hearings, and then deliberations. And once adopted today, the long-term plan will become operative from the 1st of July this year. The long-term plan has been developed in an evolving environment. Through the early period, we had COVID-19 response and recovery, which continues today. It's been developed in an environment of central government change, resource management, 3 waters review, climate change. And we know that there's more change coming with the Future for Local Government review, but we are assuming that change will at earliest affect the next LTP from 1 July 2024, but might not be for a little bit further away. So in a nutshell, the long-term plan that you have, the draft long-term plan that you have presented to you for adoption today has the same or improved levels of service across 20 activities with 45 specific performance goals, a 10-year operational expenditure of 1.7 billion and a 10-year capital expenditure of 157 million. There is an unbalanced budget due to the use of reserves, and you will note in your resolutions that there's a specific resolution on that related to the requirements under the Local Government Act. Highlights of the long-term plan that you have before you today include extension of our free bus fare trials, including a geographical extension, subsidising sustainability initiatives, dedicated community engagement funding, a new regional safety and rescue services fund, increased capital funds for flood protection, enhanced regulation of Matiti, grant to the Rotorua Museum, and enhanced funding for Māori engagement capacity and capability. The implications of this financially are a real general rates increase of 5.8% in year 1 and a targeted rates increase of 12.1% in year 1, which depends on the area and the services that the ratepayer receives. Once adopted, any updates from today?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Could you just go back to the previous slide?
It's not actually a point of order.
Well, it is actually, because what we're saying there is, no, it's a previous slide to that. What we're saying is subsidised installation of sustainability initiatives. As I understand it, we're not subsidising, we're just funding at low cost. So that is totally wrong to say we're subsidising.
Point's taken, Mr. Love, but yeah, it's probably a moot point as opposed to subsidising because it's actually a loan, isn't it? Yeah.
Which will be at no cost to the council.
Okay, I think in the resolutions, Chief Executive's got the ability to make some minor editorial changes. So we'll accommodate it there. Carry on, Siobhan.
Thank you. Once adopted, any minor updates will be made to the document. The LTP will then be published online and print. There is a communications campaign, both external and internal, planned for it. All submitters to the long-term plan will receive a response. We have to wait till adoption to make that response as decisions may change. And then all of the submissions received will feed into future committee work programs, so they will be divided up depending on theme and then used to inform committees for their future work.
So, right, thank you, Siobhan. Or just before I come to Councillor Thompson's, could I say congratulations to staff for a comprehensive body of work getting to today. In moving it, I'll just draw councillors' attention to bullet point 9, A, B, C and D, which is exposure and the agreements that we've reached in terms of future borrowing, how that borrowing is going to be applied, especially in terms of the application funding to Quayside to carry out the work in terms of development of that project, which I know everyone's got a high degree of focus on. So I'll move it and then move seconder in terms of the adoption of the plan. Seconded Councillor Thurston, Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first I'd like to echo your comments, Mr. Chairman. I think, the staff have done an outstanding job. At times I feel like that we've been on a speed, I won't say dating regime, but it certainly we seem to have carried this out at pace, but with a good deal of professionalism. So congratulations to the staff. I have 3 items. My first item is that I do have a number of probably comments around minor matters, so I'll leave that for a further process. The first issue is the response to submitters. In reading the submissions, there were a plethora of matters that were raised in written submissions and verbal submissions, which we didn't actually deliberate on. So my question is, what is the process by which the responses, I mean, for example, just take the submission we had about the clear sky in the Eastern Bay, or Social Links submission in relation to social audits. What is the process by which decisions are going to be made on what the response to those submissions are going to be? Because I would have thought that would have needed some governance input. So that's my first question.
So the plan is for all of the submissions received that were not incorporated into specific items at the deliberations meeting will be apportioned to the various committees for them to consider further action on. In the interim, the submitters will receive a response that there's no specific action on the submission at the current time, but it will inform the future work programme of council. A very large number of submitters, however, their submissions directly influence specific deliberations decisions, and in which case there'll be a slightly different response to those submitters.
Thank you. Through you again, Chair. In the past, we've actually had a spreadsheet which actually details, it's voluminous, but it's very good. And councillors are given a copy, and, I can recall highlighting things that we're all particularly interested in. So will we have that same opportunity?
So we have the full spreadsheet. So it's based on the full set of submissions which you've received in a PDF format, and we also have the spreadsheet version of that set of submissions as well. The current intent is to divide that by committees, so that you as the Chair of Strategy and Policy will receive a spreadsheet list of all the submissions that are relevant to the work of the Strategy and Policy Committee.
Thank you. I've got one other point, but I'll let Councillor Nees rather, on that particular point.
No, I had exactly the same concern, and I would request that we get to see the spreadsheet before the responses actually go out, and not let them go out and then they come to the committees, because it is it's very important. These are our constituents that have been making submissions to us, and it would be it's not pleasant when you're an elected official and somebody rings you and says, "Oh, I didn't like the letter I got, you didn't even acknowledge my point." So if we could at least see that spreadsheet, it's up to us to find the time to actually have a look at it before they're sent out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nees. You have one more point?
Yes, yes, I did. And it relates to the proposed 1-year trial of free bus fares for school children 24/7. And I'm seeking clarity, please. So at page 151, and I'm looking at the Stella version, under public transport, we have the wording implementing a 1-year trial of free bus fares for school children in Tauranga at any time of day. Now, my recollection, and I think as it's alluded to in the covering report, was that that proposal was to be subject to Waka Kotahi funding. And thank you to the Chief Executive for forwarding to us the communication on this matter with Waka Kotahi, which I confess I don't understand. My question really is did we put the proposition to Waka Kotahi that this be a 1-year trial for free fares for school children 24/7? Because that is fundamentally different to actually introducing or trying to introduce this as an ongoing matter. And so that's my first point. I'm really trying to seek clarity. I do know that a number of my colleagues probably are not supportive of this, as was indicative at the deliberations, and indeed I think a division was called on the matter. But I just wanted to take this opportunity just to have an opportunity to say why I think that this could be an incredible trial. Firstly, for Tauranga, we know that the implementation of free fares for school children and school hours has been an incredible success. And in fact, we can't keep up with demand. The rationale for this is that in Tauranga, what we have is after school, we have a whole lot of congestion being caused on our roads because parents, caregivers are in fact arriving at schools to take their children to extracurricular activities, which could be well accommodated by a bus service to enable them to do that as well. And the other real issue is that if children are encouraged and like public transport, that will ultimately encourage their parents, caregivers and whānau to actually also join in on public transport, and they will pay a fare for doing so. So I just wanted to take that opportunity to outline the rationale. But my question is, we have it in our draft LTP that we are going to implement a 1-year trial. And so I do need clarity around that. Thank you.
Chief Executive.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson, and the answer is yes, we did put that to Waka Kotahi, and they've got very firm policies here in terms of free fares. And they are very clear with us that they do not see funding of free fares at peak times as something that they will fund. And they have asked us to put a business case in to seek to have funding of free fares in Tauranga at non-peak times. So in regards to what we have in front of you today, and just to be very clear with councillors, what the long-term plan is built on is that in the urban network in Tauranga from February 2022, there will be a move to have the trial of free school students on all services. So that's not just going to and from school, that's all days at all times. And in Whakatane and Rotorua networks, urban networks, it's to have from February 2022 that there will be a trial at the peak times, that is dropping students off to school and at that time and then when they have finished school. We still need to do a business case to Waka Kotahi to get funding for the Tauranga component of non-peak times. And as we discussed at the deliberations, the long-term plan funding is assuming only a revenue reduction in regards to free fares for students. There will be anticipated additional operating costs, and over the next few months we'll be bringing those to PT and risk and assurance in terms of, so you can consider those costs. We expect demand to increase, of course, and when the Tauranga school buses were brought in here, the service was doubled within a matter of years because it was so popular. So that is the situation with free fares for students.
So thank you for that, Chief Executive. So then, just to clarify, the wording at page 151 is correct.
No, I'm in error, sorry. For Rotorua and Whakatane, it's arrival departure times only, but the wording above for Tauranga is correct as a Chief Executive.
The wording above for Tauranga is correct and it will commence February 2022.
Correct.
Thank you, Chief Executive.
Councillor Nees, then Councillor Rose.
Thank you very much for that clarification, because I have got myself quite confused with the emails in the last couple of days. So just to be sure that what we agreed in our deliberations is what's going to go in our long-term plan. I've got no substantive concerns. I've got a few minor editorial suggestions, and there's two that I particularly want to speak to. And the first one, I apologise if it causes any offence. But on page 143, we make a reference to Riki o Waitangi. And in our recent Maori case law workshop, there was reference to the two versions of the treaty, one which has 1 sense for Maori, which, as we were told, is called Te Riki, and one which has got the general sense which has been embedded in our legislation, which up until now has been called Treaty of Waitangi. The impression that I got at that workshop was that when you refer to Te Riki, you are referring to the Maori version. And we are referencing Te Riki in our document on page 143. I just want to be clear, when we say Te Tiriti in our long-term plan, are we just putting in the te reo for the official version of the treaty, which was the European version, and we're just using the Maori words for it? Or could it be assumed that we are referring to the Maori version, which has a different interpretation for some members of the community? So I just want to be really clear, because if we're just using the Maori words for the treaty, that's actually fine. I support having the words in there. If there is any risk of misinterpretation that we are referring to the Maori version, I think we need to think very carefully about that. So I'd like some clarification, please. I might have it completely wrong, but I'm unclear, and so until I'm clear, I request clarification.
Through you, Chair, what it's referring to is the principles of Te Reti o Waitangi or other legislative obligations to Māori. So it's at that high level in terms of the principles, and clearly other legislative obligations to Māori. So it's not word for word in terms of the different versions, it's embodying the principles. And staff are comfortable with the language that's in that LTP.
I just think we need to be very clear about when we use words that have a specific meaning to some people and a different meaning to others. We need to be very clear about our position. The other, just a comment that I think I need to note because it is significant, is on page 183, we have public transport and then subsequently transport and urban planning KPIs, and I think we've got the same PT KPI twice. So I just ask that you remove one of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nees. Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hopefully you can all hear me properly. Look, I just wanted to commend staff on this document and the hard work that's been put over the past few months and actually the past year to ensure that this document is not only simplified but also made with an endeavour so our communities can actually understand what we are trying to do. Just a question to the Chief Executive. Over the past months since our deliberations, have we had any further financial implications that might impact on the budget that's in this final LTP documentation?
Thank you, Councillor Rose. I really do appreciate that question because there's one thing I did want to raise, and that is since the Public Transport Committee on the 29th of May, I'm very pleased to let you know that Waka Kotahi have agreed to fund 51% of the cost of security services in Tauranga City related to public transport. For the members at the PT Committee, you may recall this was discussed and it was noted that that service would cease on the 30th of June as the Bay of Plenty Regional Council was the sole funder. Since then, Waka Kotahi have come through and have agreed to fund 51% of the costs. This does mean that there would be an additional $6.27 cost to each ratepayer in Tauranga for continuing with that security service. Per annum. However, this has enormous benefit both to the PT system and to the city's amenities, particularly around the bus infrastructure. This is a decision that I can make because it's within my delegated authority. The unplanned expenditure is $323,000. In year one of the long-term plan, it is the staff approach to use targeted rates reserves to fund this unbudgeted expenditure. So there is no further rates increase in year one of the long-term plan, and there is no change to the long-term plan considered and accepted by the auditors. Thank you for raising that. It was something that came through just last week, Councillor Rose.
Perfect, thank you. And can I also take this time to congratulate councillors as well during a process that obviously it's my first time going through a long-term plan process, and so I'd like to just commend all councillors for not only the respect, but also the hard work that we have done over the past 6 months to actually get this document sorted and actually set the direction of which our region wants to go in the next 10 years. Ngā mihi kia koutou.
Councillor,
Are we going to move?
we've got Councillor Crosby and Councillor Winters.
Some others. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do support the thrust of the LTP. Whilst councils might have different views on the different component parts, we do act in the democratic way and collective responsibility. I just want to foreshadow, I think as Siobhan has done, that there will be significant changes that you'll have to address probably in year 2 and 3 of this, particularly as the water services bill comes through, the responsibilities there for regional councils. And as Three Water starts to develop, well, that will be more than likely in the next LTP from year 24 onwards. There are going to be changes to the Local Government Act coming through that we will have to consider. So just to say that the operating environment will not be static, to say the least. So I wouldn't get overly excited about years probably 2 to 8 or 10 on this, because there will be potentially some significant changes that we'll have to do through a variation.
Thank you, Councillor Crosby. I actually wasn't listening to that, but in mind, Councillor Winters, as long as you got it under control.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I come back to 9.8? You mentioned it earlier. $100 million of new debt to Quayside. I thought we had already agreed to that some time ago. So, Matt, is this a new $100 million, or is this just reconfirming what we decided in Whakatane about 9 months ago?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it's reconfirming what you've already decided. Because this is a new long-term plan, you have to adopt it in this long-term plan.
Brilliant.
Councillor White.
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman, just to endorse acknowledgement to the staff for the work you've done. Thank you. Just want to step back in terms of the responses to the submitters, Mr. Chair, and just to support what Councillor Thompson and Councillor Nees have said. I personally have been besieged in my constituency about what's happened to our submissions, and we have a lot of volunteers with a lot of passion out there, and they just want feedback. And I can recall also the fact that part of the feedback to some of the submitters was that there will be a connection, that there will be an opportunity to deliberate and work through with them on their particular submissions, and the word in-kind support was a possibility. I remember those comments. So I just wanted to make that point, that when you communicate back to the submitters, please be very clear that it's not just a black and white yes, no, that there is an opportunity for further deliberation discussions. So that's the first point. On the matter of the TDT versus the treaty, certainly no offence is taken, Councillor Ness. I accept what the Chief Executive has indicated in that space. I also know that the case law lawyers, have a very good feast on this particular subject matter, so I'd leave it in their domain to sort that out. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor White. So the resolution in terms of adopting a long-term plan. Sorry, Councillor.
Just one further, and my apologies for interrupting. Sorry, others having an opportunity to participate. My apologies, my sight vision is poor. Just one issue I did want to raise, and that is in terms of the financials, is the merging together of staff and suppliers costs. And I'm wondering, my first issue is, why are we merging staff and suppliers, and would it not be preferable to split those out? And just an example of page 206 of the document in Stella, in terms of the democracy engagement area, we're going from a current annual plan of 18 million to 27 million, and then to 30, and then it drops back. And I'm just wondering, firstly, my first comment about staff suppliers being pulled together. My second is, what on earth is that big jump for?
So, see, Mr. Chairman, I can answer the first part of that question quite easily. We sometimes aggregate these reports up to get them onto one page. There's no intention that we'll only have one line for all of that expenditure, so the system will hold the detail for each of those lines. As to the reason behind that big jump, I'll just ask the team to process that and have a look in the system now and maybe give you an answer in a few minutes if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. As I said, the adoption of the plan has been moved and seconded. We've had good discussion. My only concluding comments are, and it's essentially around the public transport issues that Councillor Thompson spoke to earlier. I would urge the Chair of the Public Transport Committee to keep an eye on this. As has been said, the trial is not due to commence until February 22. However, I must say I'm getting concerned about the incremental creep in terms of the impost on Tauranga ratepayers. $6 here, $38 there. And in terms of the public transport, has been mentioned by the Chief Executive, an oversight from the audit of risk in terms of what are those unseen risks in terms of this relative to our involvement and Kotahi. So it's just a word of caution. It's easy to add $6 here and $6 there, but I know that the total targeted rate for Tauranga ratepayers in terms of public transport is not insignificant. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Oh, sorry, Mr. Winters.
Yeah, just while Fiona was talking about that new security subsidisation from Waka Kotahi for Tauranga. So I'm aware that Rotorua Lakes Council is adopting their long-term plan on Tuesday next week. They are putting in their budget a huge amount for security within the CBD. So is there a possibility of us having a conversation with Kotahi about the same being applied to Rotorua?
So my most recent comments stand, Councillor Winters, as an example. My view, personal view, is these issues are public security, public good issues. And local government has to be very careful that we don't put an impost on ratepayers to do something that other agencies, Crown agencies, should fundamentally be focusing on. Anyway, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Councillor Winters. I will follow up with the CEO of Rotorua Lakes Council. You'll recall, though, in this instance, in terms of security in Tauranga City, the reason for the Regional Council's involvement was because in October 2020, the then Mayor Powell requested that we attend meetings with the police in regards to the issues that were occurring in the city centre, but I certainly will follow up with the CEO.
Right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, one and all. Just before we break for morning tea, we'll see if we can knock off another one, 9.7, setting of the rates, 21.22. 2:30.
Happy to move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. It's been moved.
No, what's happening? I want to speak.
Okay, Councillor Winters, you moved seconding, or you want to speak?
I want to speak, but I'm trying to find it first.
Right, can we have a seconder?
I just want to seek clarification on number 9.
Pro forma, thank you, Mr. Crosby. Open for discussion.
Page 241, Matt, number 19, the Regional Safety and Rescue Services. I thought we'd agreed on 400,000 for the Regional Safety Services. It's now 460. Can we see why that is? And I was under the impression that the rate per rating unit was going to be the same across the Bay of Plenty, yet it's different. Can we just seek clarification on that, please?
There's difference in the requested 400,000 versus 460,000. This is GST inclusive, so the 400,000 was exclusive. And the reason it's a differential rate because services provided in each area are different. Depending on, for example, we've got surf lifesaving in some of the regions but not in others. It's dependent on what money is spent in which region.
Oh, that's whilst you're thinking about that, Councillor, what does Councillor Love?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm concerned about the setting of rates. I fully accept the democratic decision that was taken and cannot, in fact, vote against the decisions which were taken and recognise my responsibility collectively around the table to in this particular area. However, I do believe that a number of the issues which have been raised are not in the general interest of a large number of my constituents. I believe we are being unfair on them, especially at this particular time. And therefore, in the vote, I intend to abstain against the recommendations and would wish my abstention to be recorded. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Love. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. I thank Councillor Winters for raising the differential issue on those targeted rates, because I too was confused. I had thought that they were flat rates. Now I understand that the Regional Safety and Rescue Services rate is a differential. I want a surety and is different across the district. I want to make sure that the funding that's raised within each district is ring-fenced for that district. It's not intended to be cross-subsidised, because if that's your justification, that it's differential because of the services provided in that area, then we need to make sure that we're being fair to our ratepayers. So I had thought we had a flat rate across the region, and then we would have a contestable process on how that was spent. But this is slightly different.
Through Mr. Chairman, we will endeavour to ensure that those funds, as they are raised and set through the rates, are maintained within those areas. Of course, there is a third party that's involved with Regional Safety and Rescue Services provision, so we'll need to seek assurances from them how that expenditure will need to be paid. But we do need to set a legally required differential rate, and that's what we're doing now. This is the first time we're doing it this year. Any unspent funds, of course, will go into a targeted rates reserve, and there'll be consideration then again about how that will be used. But the targeted rates reserve, like it does for PT transport, will sit within those districts, just like it does for PT now.
Councillor Van Dansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Love, for your comments, which I tend to agree with. What I want to highlight here, I will be voting for this because it is a group decision, but I do want to highlight item 13, targeted rate for public transport, and take particular attention to the fact that of the 16.8 million, Tauranga City ratepayers are going to pay just under 13 million of that. So the very vast majority. And I think that when Tauranga City ratepayers get to understand the level of subsidisation that they are paying to the bus users and public transport users, there could well be a substantive outcry. It's all very well to give free services, but somebody's paying for these free services, and it is in fact the ratepayer. And so with that in mind, I think there's going to be a wicked backlash, but that said, it's been the agreement of the entire council to set this rate, and I will go along with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van Dansen. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, look, my honest opinion, and I'll be voting fully for this, my honest opinion in public transport is the key one I want to speak to here, and it's the fact that actually we're having an issue with patronage, and I would hope that once ratepayers see how much they're paying, it would actually encourage them to actually use the service. Because the thing is that as a region, we have an obligation to offer public transport, but if we're struggling with patronage, this is what has to happen. We have to pay for it somehow, and as much as we'd like to encourage Waka Kotahi to pay more, they already pay a substantial amount. So I think it is a fair observation. Obviously, it is going to hit ratepayers hard, and I do wish it could be lower, but ensuring that we can get people to and from their destinations, if that is the sacrifice that needs to be made, then so be it.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. So, I've been moved. Councillor Crosby was pro forma. Happy to? Normal? Okay. The only issue, I think, and Councillor Von Douglas, and just my closing comments, I think you're on the money. And I think at the moment, across the Western Bay of Plenty here, it is the carrot that's being applied. But unfortunately, I think the stick has to come out at some stage. And our colleague at the Western Bay of Plenty made those comments the other day. That's where you'll get the biggest change. So it's been moved in a second. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. We're adjourned. Thank you.
And recorded, please.
Thank you. We're adjourned for 20 minutes for morning tea. Through to 9.8, Science Services Supplier Panel, Contract for Procurement. So Namuta, and we've got Rob Donald on Zoom. 249. Welcome, Rob. Namuta, hand over to you. I would have thought this is pretty straightforward.
Yes, we'll take this report as read. Essentially, the current way in which we procure our consultant and contractors for the science team is on a project-by-project basis. What we're trying to do is gain increasing efficiencies by using a contractors panel, and we're proposing to use the same contracting procurement method as the engineering services panel. And we've attached to your report there the comprehensive procurement plan for technical science, technical advice and services. And if approved, we would look to go to market and invite proposals and tenders and have the new panel contract in place for the end of 2021.
Move.
Moved Councillor Thompson. Seconded Councillor Thurston. It's now open for discussion. Councillor White and Councillor Thurston McDonald.
Kia ora, Namuta. I just want to make a comment about Ngā Tauranga Māori and in the procurement process and space that, as I see it, you're looking to introduce it at timely moments in the procedure rather than having it sort of integrated into the process of selection. And I'm only saying that because I don't really want to see Ngā Tauranga Māori necessarily as a clip-on, but as a fundamental part of considerations in procurement. Can you just comment a little bit on that?
Yes, certainly, and I'll hand over to Rob because I know we're taking a special approach in terms of the space. So over to you, Rob.
Yeah, I guess two things there. The first is that we decided not to include Mātauranga advice in this contract panel. We thought it would be something that we'd think about at a later date. That doesn't preclude us from using specialists, external specialists in the meantime. The other factor is that in the selection criteria, we will be looking at particularly the larger suppliers around what they're doing around staff awareness of Mātauranga in their work. So there's just those two components there.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if I can just follow up a comment. I've had quite some time on science panels and selection panels with the MB at times, and this issue of Vision Mātauranga has always come up and has been weighted against the applications that are there on the table. And they're actually always part of the discussion as to the fit or otherwise of Mātauranga Māori, rather than consider it at a later date. You know, I mean, I'd rather sort of consider it at the now when it's across the table as opposed to thinking about it at a later date. So just my comment.
Thank you, Councillor Winters.
Just on number 10 on page 260, Namuta selection criteria, you talk about the price not weighted, but I would have thought the price would have been weighted. And does this include science review panel, include overseer?
Good questions. I'll hand over to Rob for those.
The weighting question is cost will be considered when we're making selections for individual projects. So the way it would work, we might have 2 or 3 contractors or consultants in the panel for a particular type of work, they will be asked to submit prices for that within the panel. So we'll still be considering price at that point. And the other question was around overseer.
Yeah. Yeah, is this going to include overseer?
It may include scientific advice around the use of overseer. Potentially, yes.
Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, my question is to you again, Rob. I share the same sentiments as Councillor White, and I am concerned that you're proposing that we exclude Mātauranga Māori in this proposal. I would have thought it would be an opportune time to have Mātauranga Māori included in this proposal, given we have agreed to align Mātauranga Māori in our internal process, which would include the science sector. So I am concerned that it is excluded. There is no explanation around how we would look to provide for Māori, for Mātauranga Māori in this. So I guess not really the compromise, but what I would like to see is then, if it's going to be excluded from this proposal, what then is the initiative to make sure that Mātauranga Māori is included in the work that we're doing?
Oh, right. Okay. So this proposal doesn't preclude us from seeking external mātauranga advice. We've just decided that at the moment we're not in a position where we think we can form a panel of advisors for mātauranga work, but we'll still be doing that work. It just won't sit within this panel. But look, I'm happy to take councillors' guidance on that. It can be included if it's strongly felt that we should include that component of advice.
Thank you. Yes, I would appreciate discussion, because I'm sure between the three Māori councillors, we will be able to provide you with names that would be able to provide the assistance that we're looking for, that you're seeking externally. So thank you.
Councillor Neese.
Thank you very much. Two questions for Rob. Rob, how does this fit with our arrangements with the University of Waikato for the science chairs? Because we get a lot of work done through that program.
Yes, that's correct. It sits outside, the chair arrangement sits outside of that under an established memorandum of understanding agreement that's already in place, so that would actually sit outside this panel. That would continue, but under a different agreement that already exists.
Okay, thank you. And also, we've heard from the Chief Executive that there's a shortage of modellers across the country, and that is going to be critical for us, particularly for the freshwater work. Does this include modelling? Is that being included in the actual streams of work, or is that a separate area that we need to consider?
Yes, it's absolutely one of the criteria that we're looking for under this contract, yes.
But it's not specifically mentioned that it is in there?
I think it is mentioned in the procurement plan somewhere. If it isn't, it should be. It's certainly one of the areas of expertise that we're seeking to procure under this contract.
Sorry, I might have missed it. I guess the bottom line for me is, in commissioning people, do they have the right expertise and experience, have that strong track record, and will they deliver what we want when we want it to the required standard and in a cost-effective manner? And I assume that you can assure us that this will provide us that.
Yes, that's one of the main objectives of this process, is to make sure that happens. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Neese. Councillor White, did you have another question?
Yes, so just a follow-up to Councillor McDonald's comments, Mr. Chair. Number one, I'm assuming that your Mātauranga Māori advisor within council has been part of the discussions on this one, because I understand there's a particular position occupied by Gina Mohi, I think it is, and whether or not that's been, her view has been incorporated in this. Secondly, I would expect that Mātauranga Māori in the conversation for procurement with potential contractors is included in the conversation, and that they are required to respond, not necessarily to have the expertise, but respond to how they might bring in that expertise as and when needed into their particular arrangement, rather than deal with it at a later stage and miss the boat altogether in the procurement process itself. We're under siege, if you like, Mr. Chair, around expectations around partnership and engagement with iwi, which Mātauranga Māori, Te Mana o Te Wai, and all those things are really, really important. So I just want to emphasise my own view is that it should be incorporated now rather than later.
So through the chair, absolutely. You'll see as part of that panel contract, there's a specific component of that panel contract which talks about cultural considerations as being an important component of it. So that is within the scope of work, absolutely a key part of the scope of work. When we were considering how to secure Mātauranga Māori specialists, this panel contract requires quite a formalised process and a lot of administration to be able to get onto the panel. We thought that a more flexible process to be able to secure Mātauranga expertise would be required, and therefore we thought a separate process which might be more straightforward could be pursued in terms of investigating those options, which is why we have a key component of the contract currently in terms of looking at cultural considerations for any panel contract, but we thought that perhaps a more tailored approach to gaining Mātauranga expertise was something that we wanted to investigate further. So that was just providing some clarity in relation to that.
Okay, thank you. So my concluding comments are essentially, and some of them have already been made, is that consultants have their place, but you could be very careful. This is about professionalism, expertise, and in the market where we're moving, I think the capacity of consultants to fulfil commissions over a wide range of activity is going to be really limited. So you've got to pick the good ones, and that leads you on to price. Price, I think, has to be a component. At the end of the day, you'll get what you pay. And the accountability is essentially, some are in, some are out. The only accountability you got in terms of a consultant is you don't engage them again. And as a colleague of mine once said to me, I can make enough mistakes myself without paying people to make them for me. It's always sort of stuck with us in terms of getting professional advice. So the resolution has been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. I'll move we go into
Second.
Confidential. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. The Quayside Statement of Intent as well as Toi Moana Trust Statement of Intent. Happily moved, Mr. Winters, Mr. Love.
Yep.
All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.
Mr. Chairman, have we captured the proposal to provide comment back on the? Thank you.
Yes, we have.
Thank you.
So that takes us to consideration. I've just done that. Consider items more on the agenda. Closing karakia. Mr. White. Closing karakia.
Sorry.
Right, Councillor McDonald, we've got a choice. We can either adjourn for lunch now, or if you think your agenda, not the workshop, but the agenda for committee